The practice of precedent, the doctrine of precedent, works within the context of the court structure. The hierarchy of the courts provides the fundamental institutional structure for the practice of precedent. So, in this part of the lecture, I'm going to focus on two major concerns that have developed in relation to the institutional structure of precedent. These concerns relate to, first of all, the House of Lords, and I'm going to refer primarily to the court as the House of Lords at this point in time because the cases that we will be looking at are decided by the court of the House of Lords, not by the Supreme Court. So the first point that we're going to think of is the extent to which the House of Lords binds itself, or the extent to which the House of Lords can depart from its own previous rulings. The second major theme that we will look at is the extent to which the Court of Appeal can, in exceptional circumstances, depart from the rulings of the House of Lords, and the extent to which the Court of Appeal can also depart from its own previous rulings. Now, to understand these two main themes, I just have to remind you of the primary concern of the doctrine of precedent, and that is it's a hierarchy of courts, and that the inferior courts are bound by the superior courts in the hierarchy. If we start messing with the hierarchy, we're going to produce inconsistent decisions, we're going to produce chaos. Nobody will know what the law is. That tends to be rather abruptly summarised, but that tends to be the argument that relates to the need to preserve the hierarchy of courts. In other words, it follows that courts within the hierarchy, the superior courts, House of Lords, Court of Appeal, have to, for the most part, follow their own previous rulings. If they start departing from their own previous rulings willy-nilly, then the law will develop inconsistently, and the inferior courts will not know how, in turn, to develop legal principles. We have to take a step back, though, I think, to appreciate what is going on here. And the devil is in the details, so I want to outline give you an overview of the general theme and then look at some cases to pick up on the details. Because the issue really is, and I suppose I can make reference back to one of the points I was talking about earlier on, the issue is one of justice. Now, justice requires that, for the most part, like cases are treated alike, and that relates to the hierarchy of the courts and to the fact that the superior courts must follow their own previous rulings. But it's not inconceivable, is it, that to do justice in an instant case, in an individual case, in an exceptional case, it might be necessary to depart from previous rules, previous principles. That, if you like, is, dare I say, a kind of philosophical concern. That justice, for the most part, involves the general, consistent and coherent application of rules, but one could also make the argument that in certain exceptional circumstances, to be just, one has to depart from the rules. The instances when this has occurred, I think, primarily take us to cases around the Court of Appeal. But what is at stake, I think, is perhaps, put in slightly different terms, the extent to which the common law can develop flexibly. And the extent to which we have a degree of flexibility here means that the superior courts may, in, again, certain circumstances, have to depart from their own previous rulings if there is good reason to do so. Bringing 2 points together here then. The extent to which a superior court can depart from its previous rulings relates to the development of the flexibility of the common law, again in exceptional circumstances. And the second point that will take us primarily to the case Davis and Johnson, which I'll talk about presently, takes us to a concern possibly with justice. Discrete points. I'm going to refer first of all to the House of Lords, and I'm going to read to you a statement of Lord Halsbury. Now, this is from a case called London Tramways and London City Council from 1898. And what Lord Halsbury is talking about in this case, what Lord Halsbury is arguing about, is a particular vision, if you like, of how the House of Lords should work. So let me read you this statement and then we'll think about it. So this is a quotation from Lord Halsbury. Quote, "Of course, I do not deny that cases of individual hardship may arise, and there may be a current of opinion in the profession that such a judgment was erroneous. But what is that occasional interference with what is perhaps abstract justice as compared with the inconvenience of having each question subject to being rear-guarded and the dealings of mankind rendered doubtful by reason of different decisions, so that in truth there is no final court of appeal? My lords, Interest re publici is that there should be finis litium sometime. And there can be no finis litium if it were possible to suggest in each case that it might be rearguarded because it is not an ordinary case, whatever that may mean. What is Lord Halsbury's main point here? Well, I'm hoping it's fairly clear. What Lord Halsbury is effectively saying is that the House of Lords should not depart from its previous rulings, even if there is an opinion that a previous judgment, the ruling in a previous case, a previous ratio, was erroneous, was incorrect. He says this, but what is that occasional interference with what is perhaps abstract justice as compared with the inconvenience of having each question subject to being rearguarded? In other words, he's saying that the fact that a case might have been wrongly decided is not the most important consideration. The most important consideration is that there should be finality in law, that a court should be empowered to make a final ruling, what Lord Halsbury calls, with a flourish, finis litium, an end to the case, an end to litigation. He writes off the other concerns, doesn't he, as abstract justice. He also says towards the end of the quotation that the argument that a case is not ordinary, i.e. that it deserves special treatment, that there may be an argument for departing from a previous ruling, is an argument that he doesn't countenance, he doesn't consider it, he dismisses it immediately. Now this is, I'm not saying that Lord Halsbury's arguments can be easily knocked down. They clearly connect with one of the points that I was making earlier on, that the hierarchy of courts requires each court to stick to its place in the hierarchy and to stick to its previous judgments. But it does beg the question, doesn't it? Again, I think this is a fairly commonsensical point. What would it say if the law contains a load of erroneous decisions, a load of incorrect decisions? In other words, we're saying it doesn't really matter that the law consists of incorrect decisions or wrong decisions, provided that we have a final court making rulings. Now that seems to me an arguable point. One could equally argue that surely there should be some mechanism to make sure that these erroneous decisions, these wrong decisions, can be overruled or changed to allow the law to develop in a correct way. That's clearly a compelling argument. I suppose the other point that I want to make here relates back to my idea of flexibility. Now, to some extent, for the law to be flexible, for the law to change as social, economic, what have you, circumstances change, then to some extent we may have to allow a House of Lords or a Supreme Court to overrule itself in exceptional circumstances.